r/askReddit. What's one unsolved mystery you'd like to see solved before you die? Are we alone in the universe? I can't believe more people didn't want to know this. This would be one of my top questions. But the question I want the answer to the most is how the universe came to be and why there is something rather than nothing. Edit. I stand corrected. Lots of people want to know this. The original comment was pretty far down when I saw it, and I was shocked that I hadn't seen more comments asking questions like that. I was expecting for everyone to ask existential type questions when I first saw this post. Also, I forgot to mention that I really want an answer to the mind-body problem. The Big Bang makes perfect sense until you start wondering, okay, but where did the stuff that caused the Big Bang come from, and where did the stuff that made the Big Bang possible? The question goes on forever. Nothing explains how the most simple foundations of existence just came to be and eventually pooped us out. I think there's the possibility that the singularity that caused the Big Bang is from the collapse of another universe. Which, when you begin to think that through, is pretty mind-boggling. How many times has the universe been through that cycle? What level of civilization was reached in the previous universe before collapse? But what made that first universe? Exactly. Then if there was nothingness before that, then something has to exist to make nothingness exist. Well, when you think about how long humans have been around, we've literally been transmitting radio signals for not much more than a century, 121 years to be exact. That's an insanely tiny sliver of time on the cosmological scale. If you drew a timeline of the universe that was 1 kilometer, 0.6 miles, wide, the sliver of time you could devote to 121 years would be 1,500 times thinner than a human hair. What I'm getting at is that if we're observing a planet 1,000 light-years away, which really is a stone's throw away in comparison to the size of our galaxy, then that particular planet may not evolve technological life capable of transmitting radio waves for hundreds of years. It may already have intelligent, though somewhat primitive, life that is yet to evolve to our level of technology. That just means we can't detect them, and because we can't detect them, it doesn't mean they don't exist, because obviously they do, hypothetically speaking. Now that might be a really close neighbor if they did exist. It might be that the average civilization is around 10,000 light-years distant from one another, and of course they're not all going to develop on the same timeline. Perhaps our nearest neighbor who is more advanced than us is 25k light-years distant and have developed beyond technology which emits radio waves. Perhaps they're smart and don't advertise their presence to the universe? There's so many possibilities as to why we haven't detected anyone yet. Yeah, this has to be at the top of the list. For me specifically, it'd be the answer to the Fermi paradox. After all, it's very near certain there is other life in this massive universe, so why don't we see it? Of course, at the same time, it's possible I don't want to know the answer. If it turns out to be the dark forest theory is right, for instance, I'm probably better off not thinking about it too much. Still curious though, there are so many crazy reasons it could be. We've barely even begun to look for life, don't really know where to look, and don't really know what to look for. I think we have enough reasonable assumptions to know what to look for, but we don't have the technology to look at enough places in a reasonable amount of time. I am about as godless as they come, but I will be saying a prayer for the James Webb Telescope when that finally gets to the launch pad. I would bet we aren't the only intelligent species around, but we are definitely so primitive, technology-wise, ignoring other stuff, to actually make contact. The limitation of light speed alone means it takes decades to get information from nearest stars. Some are years, and even that information is barely with any detail about planetary system. Forget the idea of actually getting information on any species living on those planets. Dark forest theory is awesome and terrifying, but probably not the right answer. I think the rare earth theory is maybe more likely. After all, it's taken us 4 billion years of evolutionary flukes in what we are beginning to realize is a very specifically tuned environment to get to humans. Even played out again in an identically friendly environment, would natural selection get to complex intelligence again? Dunno. Yeah, there's a lot more to Earth than it just being in that Goldilocks zone. There are trillions of stars, though some of which must have planets with the same conditions present, though, so I would bet on more complex intelligence than none. Have you read Rare Earth? Offers some interesting takes on the almost countless unlikely events that have occurred to facilitate complex life. I believe the authors recently updated the theory as well following refined data, which suggested even more filters. There was talk of revisiting the Drake equation with more known variables and coming out at maybe 1 to 3 civilizations per galaxy. Speculative, of course, and based on only one example. Finding life on Europa or Titan, especially if it was complex, or even non-carbon based, would certainly help with the argument against rare earth. We are not. You are welcome. Now you get to choose another one. I think it's possible that we are, but if we are, it's only because intelligence life is fleeting, not because it's unique. We assume that we're going to go on with this level of technology forever, or at least for millennia, but we've had it for less than a century and we're already hurtling towards runaway climate change. If there are 3 million early-like planets that have all held intelligent life, but that intelligent life tends to only gain interstellar communication technology a few hundred years before fizzling, then it's very possible that these various intelligent life forms just very rarely live at the same time as each other. You bring up a very good point. I hadn't thought of it that way. Right. This is something most people don't consider, or realize, when talking about the concept of aliens. The universe is billions of years old. All of human existence has happened in the blink of an eye, comparatively. So yes, there have almost certainly been other civilizations of intelligent life. The unlikely part is any of them existing at the same time. Thing is that from the Earth forming to it hosting an intelligent civilization, it went about 4.5 billion years. The universe is about 14 billion years old. So if you want to look at it another way, our civilization has been developing about 1/3 the time, which is not a blink of an eye. Of course, an alien civilization might need less time than 4 billion years to develop, but it is unlikely that they just suddenly appeared without considerable amount of time developing first. And you also need to factor in that the early universe wasn't welcoming to civilization, ranging from high risk of catastrophic disasters to the lack of heavier elements that need consecutive supernovas to form. It's all but certain that we are not the only planet harboring living things, and it's extremely likely that there are also intelligent life in abundance as well. The problem is that everything is so far away and there is no practical way to go faster than light, so travel or communication of any kind is impossible. The interesting thing about this explanation to the Fermi paradox, that civilizations are everywhere but they're missing each other in space and time, is that it strongly suggests that interstellar travel is impossible, or at least very difficult. If interstellar travel was something that could be made practical enough that we could have the galaxy-spanning star empires of science fiction, space would slowly fill up with such empires over billions of years. There might even be such a thing going on in a galaxy that's 500 million light-years away and we'd never be able to tell. Even if we saw evidence, that was from 500 million years ago and no way to know if they are still around today. This question, along with the "WTF are we here?" question, are the two I'm most fascinated by. Sometimes I think about how complex and amazing it is that we're here. How we had to be perfectly aligned with our sun to survive on this planet. The insane amount of life that is alive on this planet and how we all survive together in this world, albeit it's a little rough at times. You ever just sit outside at a spot like the beach or the woods and look around and think how freaking crazy all of this is? And to think of all the complexities and beauty we have on our little planet, in our small solar system within this one in a freaking billion galaxy, I have to believe there is more life out there. It's too big. There's too much. Will we ever find them? Probably not. But maybe that's for good reason. We are naturally curious, but we also love to control. Who knows the shit show that would happen if different species of life could access each other's planets and solar systems? It probably would be a much uglier version of Star Wars. So, I'm content with being out of reach, yet trusting that there's more out there. The disappearance of Willian Tyrel, basically a 3-year-old kid, was kidnapped in his front yard after the foster grandma went inside for a glass of water and she heard screaming from the sister, and when she ran out he was gone. This happens around 2014 and I still remember his face on the news in his Spider-Man costume. This one still gets me. I often think of William Tyrel and what his family, foster and biological, must go through every waking moment. Especially now I'm a mother of a toddler. I live with my sister, brother-in-law, and my nibblings. When he was about 3, my nephew went missing for like 15 minutes, and my sister woke me up screaming that they couldn't find him. Still the worst way I've ever woken up, and he was only missing for a short time. He was hiding in the house because he had gotten a popsicle when he shouldn't, and didn't want to get in trouble. Where did the Nazis stash the entire amber room from St. Petersburg Palace? I used to work as a guide at a castle, where it was believed to have been hidden. Every once in a while, a tourist would ask about it. One day, a small group even managed to sneak away from the tour and hide for the night at the castle, searching for it. No success though. There was some suggestion it was moved on to the Wilhelm Gustloff, which is now sitting at the bottom of the sea after the Russians sank it. It's also designated as a war grave, so in our lifetimes people won't openly be able to search the ship and see if it's there. Oh, don't worry. There's enough Polish and Russian divers out there regularly grave robbing and vandalizing these places. If it's there, someone probably already found and stole it. Soviet archives place the boxed-up amber room in the castle in Kalingrad. The Germans got it that far before their retreat became completely chaotic. The advancing Russians set fire to the castle during the fighting, and the amber room burnt up. The disappearance only became a thing in the early 1950s as the Cold War started to get serious. At that point, the Soviet government buried any reports from the fighting in Kalingrad that confirmed the burning. Better to blame Germany and the West than take the blame themselves. If that would have been the case, Königsberg would have stunk like amber for days, even during the fighting. We do not have any reports that would mention anything like that. Not from the Germans that only could leave the town after the war, not from the Soviets. Also, some parts of the amber room did show up, mostly in the US. I assume that is where you should be able to find it. The big question is, how did it get there? War stinks. There's rotting bodies of animals and people, sewer lines blown open by artillery, the smell of cordite, smoke and stench from burning buildings and their contents in addition to gas and diesel. I don't know how bad burning amber smells, but it would be mixed in with all the other horrible smells, and when the only thing on your mind is trying to stay alive. I can easily see it not being a notable thing. Soviet archives place the boxed-up amber room in the castle in Kalingrad. The Germans got it that far before their retreat became completely chaotic. It's not exactly true. The amber room was exhibited by Germans at the Königsberg, Kalingrad, castle. That was a museum at the time. When first Russian and Western Allies bombings harmed the castle, the director of the museum started to pack up and evacuate the exhibits. Part of the load, evacuated from Königsberg, was later found in another castle in the area. The room wasn't among the exhibits recovered there though. But from the letters wrote by the director of Königsberg Museum, we know he tried to find a safe hiding place for the amber room as early as 2 years before the Soviets entered Königsberg. He asked East Prussian aristocrats about the storage place in their properties. There is no info though any of the aristocrats was willing to help. There is a possibility that the amber room still lies hidden, buried in a basement of some forgotten, ruined or even obliterated palace or manor. It probably is in the United States. Or at least most of it. Some, not all, reasons are. Every time some parts of the amber room show up, it is in the US. It did not burn in Königsberg because the whole city would have stunk like amber for days. I am not sure how it ended up in the US, but I have 2 theories. One is quite familiar to everyone. The other one is based on something I was told while doing some unrelated research for my dissertation in the Russian Federation. The amber room ended up in the area around Magdeburg during the last days of the war, was found by US soldiers and sent to the US. Nothing new here, everyone knows this story. Well, it was sent to the US privately. And if someone needs some money, he sells a part of the amber room. A table, e.g. the amber room, was found by the Soviets, either in eastern Prussia, Silesia or around Berlin in the last days of the war. It was for some reason not rebuilt in Leningrad but used to pay for lend and lease. I was told this story by a person that met the guy that said he loaded the boxes on a US ship in Vladivostok during the early aftermath of the war in the Pacific, end of 1946, beginning of 1947. I am not sure what to make of the last theory, and I do not have any documents as proof. Of both theories, I prefer the first. The second theory couldn't be true. My great-grandfather was the port director in Vladivostok post-war. Antimatter. Why is the universe almost entirely matter, when equal amounts of matter and antimatter should have annihilated each other? Where is the missing antimatter? Is there a slight difference between matter and antimatter particles that causes matter to last longer? Are there places in the universe primarily made of antimatter instead of matter, well outside the observable universe? Of all the open problems in physics, this is the most pressing and deceptive one. We don't think about it much, we just take it for granted. Astronomers are looking at galaxies millions of light years away, and we just know it's made of usual matter. Personally, I think Alan Guthkamp might have it right in the most realistic sense. There might be domains within the really huge universe, where one form of matter dominates over other, each domain separated by a high-energy barrier of some sort. We have so far only gone as far as to observe things within our domain. These barriers could have expanded to cosmic size during inflation era, which is a very reasonable theory at this point. Is there a specific reason that these domains would be separated by some kind of high-energy barrier, specifically? Could they not just be separated by, well, empty space? I get that space itself isn't exactly empty, but I'm curious what the mechanism is for a barrier being needed. Just to avoid accidental collision and annihilation? At that point it almost feels artificial to have what amounts to electric fences ringing different parts of the cosmos, but I may be misunderstanding your point. Matter and antimatter annihilate when they meet, and release energy, light, equivalent to their mass. These hypothetical barrier would form in the junction of matter and antimatter domain because of this phenomenon. So what the hell even is antimatter to begin with? Antimatter is made from particles that are similar to normal particles, but have the opposite charge. For example, the electron's antiparticle is the positron, with the exact same properties, but it has positive charge, not negative. So like a left-hand copy of everything? And why would this cause annihilation? Wave-particle duality posits that every object is both a particle and a wave. When the peak and the trough of a wave meet, they neutralize each other. Consider matter and antimatter to be the peak and the trough of a wave when you dip your finger in a body of water, and when they meet each other the wave is gone, kind of like you never dipped your finger into the water in the first place. Oh, so, sort of like phase cancellation in sound waves? Yes, sort of. It's not 100% like that, but that's the gist of it. In reality, it's more like this. TLDR, something goes back to the way it used to be before it existed, and we interpret it as it disappearing. It's matter that has all the same properties of regular matter, except electrical charge. A positron is the antiparticle of an electron, and has a positive charge rather than a negative charge. When antimatter and regular matter come in contact with each other, they annihilate, releasing energy equivalent to their mass times the speed of light squared. More dumbed down, when matter is created, it's born as twins that are separated at birth. They look and act exactly the same, but one is left-handed and one is right-handed. If a right-handed person meets a left-handed person of the same type, electrons versus positrons, neutrons versus antineutrons, they'll be so compelled to fight them that they'll slam into each other, annihilating both and exploding. This will usually give birth to a new child, photons, that can run really fast and don't weigh anything because their parents gave them a bunch of energy through an explosion but left no mass to give because they annihilated each other in honorable combat. The issue currently is that virtually all people, matter, we see are right-handed, and see very few left-handed people ever. Most we've seen have been created in a lab which also produced a right-handed twin, when they should exist equally since they're always born as twins, and therefore be exploding and killing each other a bunch. So where are they? Where are the duels and explosions? We don't really know. That's the enigma. I remember reading a theory in New Scientist 20-odd years ago that the Big Bang was funnel-shaped. Any chance antimatter mostly funneled in the opposite direction of the matter funnel? Universe would kind of look like a two-cell embryo in this scenario with a barrier where the two sides meet. When matter is created, matter is not the only thing that is created. A lot of energy goes into this process, and both matter and antimatter come out of that process. They are basically each other's opposites, and when they touch each other, the process is reversed. Poof, and there's only energy again. So the big mystery is this. As far as we understand it, the creation of the universe should have created 50% matter and 50% antimatter. Not only is the observable universe we know made up out nearly 100% matter, so we don't know where all the antimatter has gone. But scientists also wonder, if it is so easy to annihilate matter and antimatter, how there is a universe made out of matter at all, instead of everything bumping into anti-everything all the time and getting annihilated before becoming something bigger like an atom, a molecule, or even a structure. If antimatter isn't observable, how do we know about its existence? Trough experiments like CERN? I wonder how we can observe it within an experiment and not in universe then. I'll be honest. I myself don't understand how we came to understand the existence of antimatter, since the first paper that describes them more or less how we understand them now came from 1928. I have not read this paper, nor do I think I would understand it if I would. Antimatter is actually observed. but its existence just doesn't last very long in a matter-rich universe. It is annihilated pretty quickly. Even something as simple as a thunderstorm already creates some antimatter. But yes, artificial production of subatomic particles and antihydrogen and antihelium have also been successful. Who the hell killed Jeffrey Epstein, and who were his clients? How we don't know the answer to this, and how no justice has been served, truly boggles my mind. Edit. To clarify, I mean justice served to his clients were a part of the whole scheme. There's clearly some big players involved that have the power to cover up all their tracks. This just goes to show how corrupt the US system is. Edit. First off, thank you the awards. This is my first post that has blown up. Secondly, to those of you saying there is no conspiracy here and that he killed himself, well, maybe so. But we know that he was involved in a sex trafficking ring. We even know several people who were on his flight logs, yet the public hasn't gotten any closure on a thorough investigation into any of these people. Ghislaine Maxwell said she has names of royalty and politicians. Everything I see points to a catacomb of misdirection and corruption. There are two parties that control America, and key figures from both would have been implicated. No way in hell the truth will be heard for a generation or two. Ever. The Kennedy assassination information is still not released. Maybe someday, in a few more generations. And they'll be disappointed at how mundane it all is. The problem with conspiracy theories is that they build a better narrative than the truth. The truth is, shit happens. The powers that be are nothing more than a smokescreen to cover up the fact that the feeling you have every day that you don't know what you're doing is felt by everyone, even those in power. We're all making it up as we go along, and sometimes we screw up. D.B. Cooper likely died in the forest and no one will find his body, or that money. Kennedy was shot by a guy in a book depository. That little girl was killed by someone close to her and the cops bungled the investigation. The plane went down in the ocean and surprise, the ocean is fricking huge. All the people in power are just as dumb as you or I and most often make dumb decisions. The difference is their dumb decisions ripple in a much bigger pond. If I forget to pay a bill, my lights get shut off. If a world leader forgets a bill, people die. We like to make connections to make sense of this chaotic world, but the truth is the world is under no obligation to make sense to you. This just goes to show how corrupt the US system is. You're not wrong, but don't kid yourself, it's not limited to the US. The worldwide collective of rich and powerful people have insulated themselves from the vagaries of life that the common person experiences. They aren't held to the laws we know, they have their own laws that protect only them. They live a world apart from us, like a Triple Crown winning horse lives compared to a plow horse. None of our worries, our struggles, our injustices are theirs. They never can be accepted as punishment for the gravest of crimes among their kind. Read the modern news report. They get caught raping children and walk free. They steal the wealth of nations and then run for political office. They kill commoners without concern. They flaunt this in front of us because they know nothing will be done. I 100% believe Epstein killed himself, just not by his own volition. He was in jail worried about all the powerful people that might come after him. Then some impossibly rich guys pay off the guards to give Epstein a message. He can either A. Work with prosecutors, name names, go to jail for life, and have their ultra-powerful people ruin the lives of everyone he loves. B. The guards will make some sloppy mistakes that will leave a window for Epstein to kill himself, after which point this all goes away and his family will be left alone. Examiners largely agree that it was a suicide and it would have been very hard to kill him some other way. I fully believe he was cornered into hanging himself. Or C. Some underpaid guards on night shift messed up. I mean, it's fun to speculate, but C is simpler and you have no proof of your theory happening. Yep. Underpaid, undertrained guards who are infamously negligent and terrible at their jobs, continue to be bad at their jobs. He killed himself, without sarcasm, because that's what the evidence points to. Anyone should know that someone in Jeffrey Epstein's circumstance would attempt to kill themselves. All measures should have been implemented to make sure that didn't happen. With how valuable Jeffrey Epstein was, they should definitely have done everything within their power to stop him from committing suicide. Even if he wasn't murdered, they let him commit suicide. Sure, maybe. The problem here is you have Epstein, who had not been convicted yet, and his lawyers trying to get him off of suicide watch. I'm not even seeing any evidence to suggest his stay on suicide watch was any shorter than anyone else's. Anyone with common sense knows that someone being convicted of running a worldwide pedophile ring with some of the most influential people in the world being involved should not be taken off suicide watch. And this isn't even getting into the super slow movement of Maxwell and her arrest and how nothing seems to be said about it ever. And that's not even getting into how he wasn't convicted the first time in Florida when he easily should have been. It wasn't just a rich person getting his way in a court case for that original one. There were serious strings pulled to get him out of that one. You hit the nail on the head with the edit. The best explanation I read was that Epstein was part of the intelligence community and he was known to the DOJ for a long time, but they were instructed from the top to leave him alone. Which makes sense. There's photographic evidence to back up the claims that he was a SEAL, which I found ridiculous until you look into it and see that he really did serve his entire contract and earned a ton of awards. Somewhere from the end of his military contract to the time he was arrested, he got mixed up with the megacorporation, which has a ton of high-dollar investments and is likely where a lot of his income came from. If I had to take a wild guess, if this information is all accurate, the intelligence community took him out to prevent the possible leaking of sensitive information that could be used against top officials both in the US and abroad. On that note, the Maxwell case has been pretty much swept under the rug, too. This one is more than likely, I have no doubt even, that he just killed himself cause he was a pussy and knew what was going to happen to him. Guards were probably sleeping or not paying any attention. Jail guards are not some elite people. For me, the best evidence against a conspiracy theory is those two guards. As if some elite organization with those two at the center of this whole plot. If they had anything to hide, they would have spilled the beans immediately. My wife's missing brother. I met him in 2009 while I was visiting Costa Rica. He was a local and befriended me. Shortly before my trip was over, he introduced me to his sister, now my wife. I left for about 8 months before returning and he disappeared in that time. He is a kind soul and is the only reason I met my wife. I wish we could find him, or at least find out what happened. His mom lights a candle for him nearly every night for the last 12 years. It's heartbreaking. I've never had anyone I know disappear that way. I did have a sister who played a principal role in a reenactment on Unsolved Mysteries, and I recall how terribly heartbroken the family of the missing person was when I met them, and I'm truly, honestly sorry that you're having to go through that kind of pain. Thank you. I am the least affected, having only known him about 2 months, yet was someone I connected with instantly. The hardest part has been watching my wife and her family cope with his disappearance. I feel for anyone that doesn't have an answer to a trauma in their life. It's hard to describe the desperation for answers when someone in your life goes missing or worse, without any clue or hint as to what happened, or where they could be. My cousin disappeared in Costa Rica as well about 20 years ago. He went to the beach with some friends and never came back. His friends say he was at the beach at night and disappeared. Sounds like he possibly drowned, but no one has ever said anything. His mom receives phone calls with just silence on the other end of the line, and it has always been a very sad mystery. I hope they find your brother-in-law. My best friend's husband has a friend who disappeared in Costa Rica without a trace in 2009. His parents made repeated trips there to follow up on possible leads and sightings, but nothing ever panned out. I didn't know him, but reading his mother's FB posts is heartbreaking. His father has since passed, but I hope his mother finds closure someday. Lesson learned: don't go to Costa Rica. That's so sad. I believe the phone calls and the silence are likely some asshole who got some kind of kick out of torturing your cousin's mom. That's despicable. I'm sure she wants to believe her son has a life somewhere and just wanted to hear his mom's voice, but that is highly improbable. Well, that's one way to see it. I prefer thinking the cousin wanted to disappear and start a new life. Maybe because of very dangerous problems with dangerous people or too many debts, and he was planning to do it while in this trip because it'd be easier. Else why would he go by himself to the beach at night when he's in a trip with friends? He probably told them he was going to the beach to not raise any suspect, and he can't contact any member of the family for the rest of his life, so he just calls his mother every once in a while to hear her voice and to, in some way, letting her know he's alright. That's unlikely, unfortunately. To not say anything while she's probably pleading with the caller. Is it you? Say something. I miss you so much. Tell me it's you. Say anything. I don't believe any person has that kind of discipline to ignore their parent. It's not like there's legal implications or physical threats if he just said, "It's me, I miss you. I have to go." Also, if the kid's goal was just to hear his mother's voice, He'd probably disguise his voice and pretend to be a service provider or something. Why not do that? Get what you want and cause the least harm. To call someone and repeatedly stay silent in spite of their pleading is cruel. I would bet my life it is some low-life troll, not the son. He's long dead, unfortunately, or he wouldn't be so vague. If he started a new life because of a dangerous situation but also wanted to hear his mom's voice so desperately, you can't imagine he would try to conceive of a situation where he talks to his mother but begs for her silence due to the circumstances. Instead, he's so rigid and disciplined that he'd call multiple times and hear her breakdown on the phone but not say a word because he got what he wanted. That is highly improbable. My best friend's little brother disappeared from an army base last July. Good or bad, I'd like to know what happened to Private Richard Halliday. I was born and raised in that area. I hate to say it, but I would put money on him being dead and buried somewhere on Fort Bliss. That's also the location where the young asylum-seeking kids have been detained, disappeared from Gov custody. There's a lot of sketch shit going on at Fort Bliss. El Paso border town with Juarez. My money is they got caught at the wrong place at the wrong time while partying at some place like La Playa across the border. Fort Bliss itself is not sketch. I was stationed there from 2015 to 2019. I'm still in El Paso in college. What is sketch, however, are the sketchy parts of town, which other places also have, and Juarez gang activity. Bliss is nothing compared to Fort Hood or Chicago. Hood is like some weird vortex of evil. Or the other posts are just as bad, but keeping their shit out of the public eye better than Hood. Fort Hood has had some horrible things occur there and everyone just keeps their head down and pretends it's business as usual. The great place. When I got there in 2006 we went through a briefing of what to do when you're robbed at gunpoint because an LT was robbed and murdered earlier that year. Read it, thought you were referring to Pennywise, the clown, then figure out LT. I'm sorry for being so late, but his parents were only made aware of him being gone around a month later, right? They were only made aware of him being gone because they started calling up the chain. No one ever contacted them. And yeah, it was about a month after the day he disappeared. They usually talked with him once a week. They'd assumed he'd had remote training. Richard was third-generation Army and hadn't been allowed to bring his phone. Unbelievable. I feel very sorry for the remaining family. Hope they ever find out what really happened. Me too. They really, especially his mom and one of his sisters, need closure either way. Whether he did something bad or something bad happened to him, I'm not sure they'll ever be able to pick up life again otherwise. Madeleine McCann. This is one I'd like to see answered. Did she die in the hotel room? Is she somewhere still alive not knowing who she really is? Or even reading this right now wondering what happened to that little girl with the same eyes as her? Did the parents do it? What, if anything, does the German suspect have to do with it? So many unanswered questions. Last I heard they were searching that German suspect's property and found like a hidden passageway. I thought for sure he did after that, but no update on the case happened. In cases like these, the parents should at least be charged with criminal negligence. If the children hadn't been left on their own, too young to defend themselves or call for help, then she wouldn't have been kidnapped. Let it be a lesson to parents everywhere. Just because you've lost a child doesn't mean you deserve sympathy if you had absolutely no safeguards in place to protect the child from abduction. And if they were working class, one think they would have been charged. Absolutely. I couldn't believe them when they said it was normal in the UK to leave infants alone. Never known any competent parent from any time period leaving toddlers alone in an unlocked room in a foreign country. Had it been Gary and Brenda, the Chippy owners from Dewsbury, they'd still be locked up for negligence. I think it's because they are middle class and the media is made up of the middle class, so there was no condemnation and a lot of "we've all left our small children alone in hotels while we've been at the bar" type of articles. Meanwhile, everyone I knew was disgusted and would never think of doing something like that, especially with children that small. It utterly baffles me why one of them just couldn't stay behind as a babysitter, or use the babysitting service that was provided by the hotel. I don't understand, and will never understand, why any one of these intelligent people thought that leaving toddlers was an okay thing to do. I remember being on a similarish family holiday in Spain with two other families we were friends with. I, 13, babysat two of the youngest kids, I think 5 and 7, so the adults could go have a meal together one night, and I was told repeatedly, "Do not open this door for anyone. Leave the latch on, leave the door locked. The do not disturb sign is on, so there is zero reason for anyone to knock. Full-scale military operation for a 2-hour meal. I think we even got a phone call midway through to check we were all happy and okay. People seem to forget that about the parents and their negligence has never really been raised or questioned. Who goes to a foreign country and then leaves their 2-year-old twins and 3-year-old daughter alone in a ground-floor apartment at night with the door unlocked? That's just complete idiocy. Add in that they chose to go out drinking with friends over their children's safety and you get child negligence, but nobody really questions that. There's been people in the past who have been arrested, and some have even been charged with child abandonment, endangerment, and have received a jail sentence for leaving their child home alone for less than 5 minutes, but for some reason, the McCanns gets a free pass on this. I've already said this on another comment, but I'll repeat it since it's relevant to your comment. I live in Portugal and I've seen news articles of people here losing their children's custody and being charged with negligence over leaving their kids alone in the car or leaving them home alone. According to our law, they should have absolutely gotten charged and lost custody of the other children. It's ridiculous that it didn't happen. You could argue that they've already been punished. You could also argue that their daughter was punished more. She deserved better. They've made a lot of money from her disappearance. I actually heard their fundraisers ended up paying off their mortgage. They've wrote books and been almost celebrities, for not good reasons admittedly, but still. Shannon Matthews' fake kidnapping springs to mind. Owen Jones' book, Chavs, does an exploration of the public perception of Shannon Matthews versus Madeleine McCann. TLDR, from the onset of Shannon's case, it looked very likely that she was kidnapped by a third party. But because her family were seen as stereotypical council house types, there wasn't much media or government attention. Meanwhile, the McCanns had no expense spared for the investigation of Madeleine, leading to the notoriety the case has today. Jones argues that this is due to their social status, being middle, upper-class doctors. The parents made themselves look guilty by not listening to anything the police said. They were told not to use a photo of Maddie that showed her eye deformity, as it would make whoever took her panic and she would more likely be killed. What did they do? The first photo they used showed her eye deformity. Then one of their friends tried to change their timeline of the night and then at the last moment changed it back. Also, the blood found in the room and the rental car hint something. I agree with other in this thread that it could be old blood. However, with that what happened, it does seem suspicious. Then there's her bunny Teddy. They were told to leave it alone so the police dogs could get a better scent. What did they do? Hugged it and got their own scents all over it. All in all, the parents are extremely suspicious, and even if they didn't kill her, they should be in jail for leaving 3 kids unattended so they could go drinking. Also, I really want to know why they took a fridge that had broken in their hotel room to a tip. Who does that? I've always found that super weird. There is zero credible evidence that the parents did it. Outside of hysterical mums groups, no one thinks the parents killed her. If you have new evidence for us all, please share it. I'm not a hysterical mum or a member of any such groups or subreddits, and I truly believe, and have always believed, that the parents are responsible. Not saying that they committed murder, but believe that it may have been accidental and they then covered it up either in panic or self-protection. Responsible for sure. They left small children unattended and went out for dinner. That's not an appropriate thing to do. Trafficked. Unknown if she's still alive. As the years pass, the odds go down for her survival. The assumption is she has always been somewhere that is remote enough to control access but also lucrative enough to keep her. The odds of someone other than her current, let's say, keeper, even though I hate it and can't find anything better that isn't a string of well-earned profanity, taking on such a high-profile person isn't good. And that is if they didn't freak out early and she's been dead for years. But yeah, I would like the family to get an answer. The theory is there is a guy in prison already that abducted and killed her. Man, I wouldn't be surprised if she's been dead for 10 years now. But what happened in that room that night is the biggest mystery. Dogs and investigators found blood in the room and in the back of the car. And WHO the hell leaves their hotel room open with their children in a foreign country when you're out to eat? It's a mess waiting to happen. Parents should have faced negligence charges, but they were clearly too middle class. It's hard to understand, but people do dumber shit every day when they feel safe. Speculation here is dangerous, but everything about that situation was fricked. I don't suspect the parents, but they did frick up. The mom has said some hella creepy things though. They were hanging around with known pedophiles, borrowed a car off a pedophile that cadaver dogs reacted to. In an interview, she cried about what was going to happen to her perfect little genitals. I remember seeing her reaction to the cadaver dogs not having conclusive evidence to point to a death in the apartment. It was something like, "You've got nothing on me." And I remember thinking at the time, as a mother, my first reaction would be, "Oh, thank God. There's a chance my child is still alive." Not, "Oh good. There's no incriminating evidence." Really weird reaction. Exactly. There's slips of the tongue due to stress, but their entire reactions were just so odd. The first thing she screamed was, "They've taken her." Who? If my child was gone, my first reaction would be, "Oh shit, she's went a walk, I better go look." I thought it was pretty much confirmed that Christian Bruckner was responsible. Don't know why you're being downvoted. The German authorities reported last year that they have found evidence that he abducted and murdered her, and they are still putting together their case. As he's already in jail, there isn't a huge rush to convict him for it. They're not going to make their evidence public until they've put their case together. Obviously everyone wants to see this evidence because the case has gone on so long, but I guess we will have to wait and see. Yeah, I just did some more research after hearing about him as a suspect last year. He's the only suspect they've named, and otherwise they've been very tight-lipped on the case. They said they don't have forensic evidence, but his phone was traced to the block of the crime scene the night it occurred, and they said there's other evidence they have on him that they're not sharing right now. Every article one found all but confirmed he was guilty, but they're waiting on building a case. But there's not a huge rush because he is in prison. MH370. I'm sure they'll eventually find the wreckage and have a better idea exactly what happened, but even today they're still finding old World War II ships and even ships older than that. So I hope that it's found before I leave, because I do wonder what happened to that plane. I just hope it's a matter of years or decades, and not centuries. I just read a comprehensive article that went into great detail about the case, and it is all but solved. They know where it went down because lots of pieces have washed up on shore. After all possible theories have been studied, the only one that holds up was pilot suicide. Yes, I've read up and heard a ton of talks about this flight. The best answer was that the pilot turned off communication and flew the plane high enough to cause every passenger to essentially suffocate. Then the plane kept flying over the ocean till it ran out of gas and crashed full speed over the ocean. The reason only parts have been found is that the plane was traveling at such a high speed, crashing into the ocean, which is like crashing into a hard surface, then causing the plane to be obliterated to pieces. They won't find any major pieces because of the rate of travel, and no solid idea where it went down. The only evidence of the theory is that one of the pilots had a flight simulator with a flight path strangely similar to what they took, and he took it off course purposely towards the ocean. I think they found all they could because of the destruction of the crash and no known idea where it legitimately crashed. He didn't have to fly the plane high to make the people on the plane pass out. Pilots can literally depressurize their planes. It's made me freak out ever since I learned that. Any pilot could just kill all their passengers anytime they wanted. Lol. Last time this came up, there was a dude arguing with everyone that there is absolutely no evidence that it was pilot suicide, and that the far more plausible theory was that a series of coincidental mishaps happened, each one being nearly impossible, leaving the pilot to search for an airport to land before eventually running out of gas and or crashing into the ocean to avoid hurting anyone else or something like that. Every time someone would prove him wrong, he'd just come up with some new complicated convoluted answer. I'm a proponent that someone should have the right to choose how and when they die. But what bothers me is that it should not harm, injure, or kill another person. Like, don't jump out into traffic or off of an overpass. You're going to severely traumatize the person that struck you, or you will cause an accident that leads to the injuries or deaths of others. If the pilot wanted to end his life, what reason would he have to take over 200 passengers and crew with him? My best friend's dad is a pilot who was involved with the Australian investigation of that flight. He was saying from the get-go, once the flight path was known, that pilot suicide was the only responsible explanation. As more evidence came in, it really seems unavoidable that's the truth. The only reason the general public still thinks it's a mystery is because of the Malaysian authorities' refusal to publicly admit it and the reluctance of the Australian investigators to contradict them. From what I've read, the pilot's suicide makes little sense. Most of the facts are misrepresented. There was no pre-planned flight on his home flight sim, but a couple random GPS points that pointed in the same general direction, but were most likely from multiple different flights. There's more evidence that Russia shot the plane down. There was a flurry of military activity right after it happened, and the Russians are pushing the suicide narrative. Why would Russia shoot it down? Know nothing about this subject, so not being snarky, just curious your take. Highly unlikely. If it was shot down, then everything would have been normal until it just disappeared off the screen, and then they'd find the plane crashed at that location. Instead, there was a long series of unusual actions, including manually turning off the radar at the exact place where it left one tower and would have been picked up at another tower. It would have had to have been shot down at that precise moment, and the crash site would have been located nearly immediately. Parts of the plane have been washing up on beaches in Madagascar, so they know approximately where it went down, and there are no signs of explosion on them. It seems like it blew into pieces when it struck the water. Russia is an awful country, and lots can be blamed on them, but not this. If their military was scrambled, it was probably because the location of this plane was in doubt for a long time, and Russia probably determined that it would be used as a weapon against one of their cities, so they were preparing to defend themselves against it. I don't think it's been solved, unless you're fine with really broad meaning of the term. As for location, the Southern Indian Ocean theory has been prevalent since the first month of the search, and it looks like all the debris drift studies have only pointed it at the general area of the search box from the first searches, which is a huge long and thin area the size of the US West Coast states or Japan. I don't think people will find closure until they find the actual plane though. As for culprit, the pilot suicide theory has been the leading one since the first few months, but there are questions about why. Also, what the last moments of the flight were, especially if the pilot was in control to the end and landed it in the water, or if he killed himself, asphyxiated beforehand and it dived down into the water. We won't know until we find the plane and black box. This was my second mystery. Still look for anything new every now and then. How did this even happen? I do believe it was pilot suicide, just why he did it is still the mystery. But more to the point, I more hope that they find the plane wreckage to give those 200 plus families some closure. Plus, there were so many holes that were discovered in our airline safety and traffic control that needs to be patched so that this can't happen again. The pilot's wife left him and took the kids. He started hating the Malaysian government and posting some very anti-government things online. He created a flight simulation that ended in the middle of the ocean. It's amazing that all the misinfo and suppression of clear evidence on the case isn't known by many interested in the case. It got so covered up by alien conspiracies and government involvement. I'm not a conspiracy hater at all, but this case is so clear when you find the right sources. The Malaysian government might well be a corrupt and incompetent shitshow, but they have done a good job burying the truth of this. What are the Mormons keeping in their vault that's surrounded in granite and heavily guarded? 50-50 money or some random thing they think is magic. I'm really not trying to shit on the Mormons too much, but you start reading up on Joseph Smith and it's rather freaking amazing Mormonism ever caught on. Mormonism is just the Scientology of the 1800s, and I cannot be convinced otherwise. Mormonism is steampunk Scientology, but exponentially less cool than that sounds. I'm pretty sure they are family history records, including journals, photos, videos, etc. of ancestors. I grew up in the church and that was what I've heard inside the church and out. Also, they rent space there for data backup storage now because they used to keep gold and silver in their back prior to the 70s and 80s. It's mostly church records, church artifacts, and genealogical records. People make it more than it really is, and it's not a huge mystery. I believe that actually. The Mormons are excellent record keepers and have massive genealogical records and provide them for free through the Family Tree website, app. I've used it before when tracing my family line and they are a wealth of info. I even had to contact them because it looked like something has been altered incorrectly and they were really nice and helpful. Yeah, I mean, what else would you expect? I'd believe the Catholic Church has some crazy shit locked up because they're 2,000-ish years old, but what would the Mormon Church have from a couple hundred years in America? Maybe money too, but that's not very exciting. Question: why are Mormons so interested in genealogy? I find it unsettling that any religion is considered one of the best keepers of genealogy. In a nutshell, one has to be baptized and do other temple work for that person to go to the best version of Mormon heaven. Other Mormons can perform the same ordinances on behalf of the dead. Families have to be sealed, one of the ordinances, to be in heaven together. So they push genealogy on its members to do temple work for their deceased ancestors. In my perspective, I see it as a bunch of pointless busywork to keep members in the cult. They think they're doing the Lord's work by saving people, but it's actually pretty destructive to those who leave because then you ruin your chances at being in best heaven with your family. It's a whole complicated mess. Google Mormon plan of salvation, since that's basically the key to all this. I just want to know who D.B. Cooper is. I know it's lame, but I'm curious. This was posted by U. Sancti in another thread. I did not write it, but I think it's a very compelling theory. I'll link the OG comment down below. My money is on Ted Braden. If you could invent a D.B. Cooper suspect, you'd invent Ted Braden. Check it out. Braden was a paratrooper in World War II, jumped on D-Day with the 101st at age 16, Korea, and Vietnam. He won multiple international skydiving competitions while a member of the Army. 911 logged jumps with the military and was a pioneer of halo jumping, was recruited to be a team leader in the MACV SOGs. This was the predecessor to Delta Force and was a multi-service covert military special force run by the CIA. Led squads on covert jumps into Laos, Cambodia, and northern Vietnam from 64 to 67. Did many of these jumps into enemy territory off the aft stairs of, that's right, Boeing 727s. At the time of the skyjacking, the only people who knew this could be done were those involved in these MACV SOG missions and some employees at Boeing. Was always bitching about how he and his fellow soldiers weren't paid enough. Was always coming up with schemes to make, extort, steal money while in the service. In 1967, he heard about how people were looking for mercenaries to fight in the Congolese Civil War and how well they would be paying, so he went AWOL from Vietnam and made his way to the Congo. The CIA went after him and eventually found and arrested him in the Congo. Was imprisoned at Fort Dix for a very brief time and mysteriously was never convicted of anything, nor tried, and was merely given an honorable discharge and told that he couldn't re-enlist in the military. Once released, he tried to go overseas to be a mercenary again and found out that his name had been blacklisted by the CIA, and so he wasn't allowed to leave the country to be a mercenary. Not knowing how to make a living other than by being a soldier, he resorted to being a truck driver. His trucking company was stationed out of Vancouver. Interesting. When the Cooper hijacking happened, several members of the military contacted the FBI and essentially said, "This can only be Ted Braden." Braden had no family, so there wasn't anyone around to, in retrospect, said, "Hey, Dad wasn't around during Thanksgiving 1971. His alibi was that he was driving his truck on the plane. Cooper was by everyone who remembered him as being middle-aged, or mid-40s. Braden was 44. Cooper was described as being 5 feet 8 - 5 feet 10 and slight. Braden was 5 feet 9 and 150 pounds. Cooper was described as being somewhat olive-skinned and swarthy. Braden's mother's side were Sicilian. Cooper was extremely calm the entire time. The only time he showed any emotion was when he was arguing with the pilots because he wanted to take off from Seattle with the stairs down. They didn't think it could be done. Cooper told them it absolutely could be done and he demanded it be done. The pilots simply refused to do so, thinking it would cause the plane to crash, and Cooper eventually relented. Braden was described by many of his military colleagues and commanding officers as one of the calmest people under fire you could imagine. Cooper smoked Raleigh cigarettes and so did Braden. Cooper was described by both flight attendants who spoke with him as having either a Midwestern accent or no accent. Braden was from Ohio. Cooper chose the military parachute over the more modern sport parachute. When asked by the flight attendant why he was doing this, he replied, "I don't have a grudge against your airline, miss. I just have a grudge." Braden certainly had a grudge against the government for blacklisting him from the only work for which he was skilled at, being a soldier. The alias, Dan Cooper. Dan Cooper was the name of a popular 50s and 60s French-language comic book series. The hero, Dan Cooper, skydived into areas to fight the bad guys. What is a country whose official language is French? The Congo. If Braden was Cooper, then it's extremely plausible that he was exposed to this comic series while serving in the Congo. Following the hijacking, recent investigation shows that in 1972, despite being a truck driver, he bought his mother a new car as well as a new car for himself, and that he was living in a freaking penthouse in Manhattan. Was arrested in the mid-70s for a major racketeering job in the trucking industry, but like his mysterious release from going AWOL, he was once again given a slap on the wrist and the charges were dropped. His personality. He was always a loner and never had close friends in his life. Men he served with would later say that when they would go to the bars, Braden would sit at the end of the bar by himself, just seeming to sulk. A Green Beret who served with him stated, "Braden is among those professionals who appear to have a secret death wish coupled with well-trained instincts for survival. He continually placed himself in unnecessary danger but always managed to get away with it." Another Special Forces member stated, "He was the perfect combination of high intelligence and criminality. Military tests that he took for entrance into the MACV-SOGs indicated that he likely possessed a genius-level IQ. Couple things to consider. Jumping out of a freaking jumbo jet is no small potatoes. Many of the famous Cooper suspects had been static line paratroopers in World War II or even had no known skydiving experience at all. You'd need to have mega balls to jump out of a jet and also have the skill set to do it. Perhaps most critically, you'd need to know that it could even be freaking done in the first place." There were several Cooper copycats who successfully pulled off similar skyjackings of 727s in the months after Cooper, but to be the guy who first did it, that takes someone special. The suitcase bomb. While this is a common trope you see in movies these days, it wasn't so in 1971. The whole concept of a suitcase bomb required some ingenuity. His calmness is especially noteworthy when you consider that the subsequent copycats were nervous wrecks during their skyjackings, despite being badasses in their own right. Richard McCoy won a Distinguished Flying Cross in a Silver Star in Vietnam as a chopper pilot. He literally flew hundreds of sorties as a chopper pilot. Yet during his skyjacking he was noted, even before he started the skyjacking, for being fidgety and sweating and breathing heavy. Rob Heddy also successfully pulled a 727 skyjacking. He was a 21-year-old Vietnam paratrooper who served 2 tours in the thickest fighting in Vietnam, and yet he later described himself as being barely able to breathe during his skyjacking. Cooper, on the other hand, sat calmly for 5 hours, smoking cigarettes and drinking his bourbon and coke, with one hand on the detonator. The flight attendant lit his cigarettes for him. It's also worth noting that none of the copycats gave any specific instructions to the pilots on how to fly the 727. They just jumped out with the jet going full speed and it nearly killed 2 of them. What Cooper told the pilots wasn't public knowledge at the time. Cooper told them to fly at 180 knots, wheels down, with flaps at 15 degrees and at 10,000 feet. That's mighty specific and strongly indicates that Cooper had knowledge of how best to safely parachute out of a 727. Cooper was also the only one to not be caught. Getting caught on his missions with Spec Ops meant certain death. This is a man who knew how to escape situations and blend into his environment. Occam's razor would point toward Ted Braden being D.B. Cooper. One of the military's most experienced skydivers is kicked out of the service and isn't allowed to pursue a lucrative career as a mercenary, so he uses the skills that the military taught him to ransom $200,000 from the government. I have this fun theory in my head that D.B. Cooper isn't one person, but the entire flight crew. From what I have read, no other passengers really got a good view of D.B. Cooper, and all descriptions of events came from the flight crew. It would also explain why a body never showed up, as the money was just thrown out of the plane and meant to be retrieved afterwards. That honestly may be the most likely scenario, just like most armored truck robberies are inside jobs. Might make more sense if the plane was a vehicle for transporting money. That is a fun theory. The Alps Murders, as they're known in the UK, an English family on holiday in France, are assassinated with an old pistol with accuracy that points towards a professional hit. A cyclist is found murdered in the same lay-by-2 by the same weapon. The assassin thought they had tied up all loose ends until after 8 hours on the scene the French police found their 4-year-old daughter hiding under her dead mother's legs. 9 years later there's still no clue over who or why they were all murdered. This year, the investigation of the Alps Murders, or La Tuerie de Chevaline, as we call it, was reopened after some searches in a different case that sounds like the plot of a polar. A CEO, Muriel Millet, ordered a hit on a syndicalist. Members of the Freemason Lodge called Athanor actually organized the hit. They confessed and are incarcerated, using as hitmen 2 agents from the DGSE, the French Secret Services. It revealed a few other successful and unsuccessful hits, all having this Athanor Lodge as a common denominator. After the searches, they reopened the Alps Murders case, so I guess it's safe to speculate that it was most probably an organized hit gone wrong, since a cyclist saw it and subsequently got shot. Holy shit. The more information there was, the less clear it became. After reading all that, I agree with you. I need to know what the frick happened. For reals, every paragraph near the end I was like, well, this is the end. No answers, some crazy hit. Then it just kept going and getting more intriguing. This definitely feels like some crazy CIA or foreign intelligence type shit. I'm going to ask a potentially very stupid question. What are the odds of someone being incredibly lucky and just hitting double tap headshots on everyone? Like, is this outside the realm of possibility and consideration? Not a stupid question. For an inexperienced shooter to hit 8 to 21 shots with a handgun on 4 separate approximately 6 inches moving targets, human heads, at a reasonable distance, I'm guesstimating 15 yards, the odds would be very near zero. That would be very difficult shooting for even most experienced shooters. For an inexperienced shooter to hit a single 6 inches stationary target 8 to 21 times at 15 yards, I'd consider it a fairly good first outing. Further than 15 yards, I'd consider 8 to 21 exceptional for a beginner. A lot of that depends on the caliber and weight, because heavier guns recoil less a pistol and the length of the slide, though, because recoil and sight radius can significantly affect how accurate someone will be with a certain handgun. Most people practice pistol shooting on stationary targets at self-defense distances, 7 to 10 yards, for reference. Also worth noting that marksmanship is a perishable skill, so for someone to be able to do this kind of shooting would require frequent practice. Whoever shot these people was a very, very good shot. I'd like to know what happened to Andrew Gosden. A 14-year-old boy left home in Yorkshire one morning in 2007 dressed in his school uniform, and then withdrew all his money from his bank account. He went back home after his parents had gone to work and changed out of his uniform, then went to the train station and bought a one-way ticket to London, about 2 hours away by train. There is CCTV footage of him leaving King's Cross station, but that's the last time he was seen. He didn't tell his parents he was planning to go to London, and it's never been established why he went there. I'd love to find out he's actually okay, or even if not for his parents to finally find out what happened to him. It broke my heart reading his parents refused to change the locks of their house in case he comes back home. I remember watching a true crime show where parents kept their porch light on for years for their missing daughter, so she's not scared when she comes back. Years later they found out she was murdered. The end scene was them finally turning off the light. I sobbed like a baby. I saw a case of a kid who was kidnapped for ransom money on Mexico. His dad was a wealthy businessman and he had been cooperating with his son's captors to get him back. I think he paid what they were asking for, so the kidnappers told him his son was going to be home at any time. His dad stayed home by the door every day waiting for his son to return, and stayed up all night because, in case his son came back in the middle of the night, he didn't want him to see his dad sleeping like as if his life meant nothing. That was quite sad to hear. Worst thing is that even though he paid the amount his kidnappers wanted, they had actually killed him and threw his body away on the second day of his kidnapping or something. I hadn't heard about this and just looked up the pretty limited Wikipedia page and watched the CCTV footage and kind of agree with the top comment on that CCTV footage. He did this as a spur of the moment thing, which is why he left stuff behind, and the likelihood is that he committed suicide. One-way ticket, left money he saved at home, no charger for his PSP. With the money he had he would have been able to eat when needed but not stay indoors anywhere. If he had stayed somewhere he would have already been identified, and as 14-year-old if he had ran off to London he would have already become homeless and gone back on what he was doing immediately and identified himself to someone to be able to return. Doesn't mean that foul play hasn't happened at some point, as we know that has been a common history for London's homeless population, but I'd lean more towards the former happening. Edit. And with a potential trigger warning. People are saying, why go to London? Where is the body? Maybe he had this, maybe he had that. First off, I just gave my opinion on what happened. I'm not presenting that I know for a fact he committed suicide. I even left it open to the idea that something else happened. I just think that realistically he killed himself. Why go to London? He lives in Doncaster, so yeah, there are places he could totally have just done it. But, and it is a common theme from my experiences, you don't want to put your family through the pain of finding you dead, which can also be applied to the left behind passport. Also, often no note is left behind. Then also, London is a big place, easy to hide amongst a crowd and blend in, but it also has a huge river running through it. If you were committing such an act, then it'd be an obvious spot. Also, taking £200 in my mind is to guarantee a day of ticket. In the UK they cost a lot IDKY. Where's the body? Again, London is a big place. People go missing, die, etc. every day or every other day, and I think we'd all be surprised at the lack of discoveries of bodies in the city. If he is in the Thames, Fat chance they'd bother dredging it. Could have also washed out somewhere? Could be in a building, but they can't kick every building's doors in to find him. Also, surely they would have DNA samples from his house, and if he went to a hospital something would show up. He would also need to be able to identify himself. Hard to do anything here without an identity. Also, maybe they did get a body, but they have no idea if it was his or one of potentially many supposedly at the bottom there. What if someone gave him X? My first thought when reading was that yeah, he could have been groomed. Obviously, there is more at play, more people, more motivations, could be whatever. Could even be he wanted to spur of the moment go visit his grandmother in London as he had been offered the chance earlier, went unannounced, and in the space of getting off the train, God knows you know. I would like if one day he turned up. That's a nice thought, but realistically I don't think he is alive, sadly. Again, it is all just speculation, but in my mind nothing about this screams special case, other than the lack of clear motive. My first thought was he was going to meet an internet predator, but your theory also seems quite reasonable. Apparently he had no computer, no email. Forensics checked school computers and nothing came up of note. His sister stated he had no social media as he didn't view it as useful, and when his phone broke he didn't want it replacing. They also had Sony check if his PSP pinged their servers as it would if connected to the internet, and they confirmed it had not ever done so, meaning its only use even on the day of his disappearance was for playing games, as the two can't be done in tandem. I too thought it must be a grooming situation, but looking at the CCTV and the statements, it was a lone act spur of the moment type thing. Don't know if I really want to know the answer to this, but how does a 14-year-old commit suicide in a way that the body was never found? I would love to see how a black hole works before I die. We know it sucks in all the matter to the singularity, but we don't know where it goes from there. Finding how a black hole works will change the understanding of the universe itself. I hope it happens during my lifetime. I imagine they're creating new universes. Sort of how the idea behind the Big Bang suggests our universe came from a speck the size of an atom. Perhaps that speck was the outlet of another universe's black hole. Signed, a stoned Redditor. I'm still keen on the theory of black holes absorbing and containing incredibly dense matter until they all swallow each other. They could even swallow antimatter and just store tons of the resulting pure energy. Then once heat death occurs, it would just be a matter of time until all the eventual black holes Highlander in a final super black hole is left. Then once it sucks everything in, the whole universe becomes some uncontainable amount of energy with nothing left to keep it in and explodes outwards again, forming another Big Bang. Maybe if they just store energy, the resulting clash would have some way to turn the energy back into physical materials? But likely just all the compressed material in the universe suddenly let free again at an unimaginable scale. This would imply the universe's cycles over and over on a ridiculously long scale, and each time the matter implodes randomly. But given how black holes are almost like the antithesis of the Big Bang, and we now know they can combine and grow, a final super black hole resulting in a Big Bang seems a little more plausible. While I don't fully believe the idea I'm about to say nor claim truth to it, I like toying around with the idea that all black holes funnel down to the same singularity. The same one before the Big Bang split it. The idea only works if you imagine the universe as an inflating balloon of spacetime. And places of high mass where spacetime bends creates divots on the balloon's surface. The bigger the bend, the deeper the divot. And black holes are spacetime funnels that all meet in the center, portals to our pre-Big Bang singularity universe. No way to prove this, obviously. But it's a fun way of explaining where energy that falls into black holes goes without the need for white holes. Ooh, I really like that. It's also got sort of a time loop quality to it, where all the matter that gets sucked into black holes goes to feed the singularity, which eventually explodes into our universe, where that same matter feeds the singularity through black holes until it explodes into our universe. Yada yada. God, physics are so cool. Here's some more thoughts from a potentially intoxicated unreliable Redditor. I'm thinking that, when a singularity forms, spacetime gets dragged into it so hard that it tears and makes a tiny hole. The gravity of the singularity moves it right into the mouth of the hole, where it stabilizes and matter flows through the hole explosively as spacetime unfolds on the other side. And technically, since all the mass of the singularity is still inside the black hole, just moved through a hole connecting the insides to another universe, the black hole doesn't just dissolve. Now, the problem with this totally not intoxicated theory is conservation of mass, cause black holes don't have enough mass to push through to make a whole universe, obvsly. So any black holes that exist can only make a universe much smaller than the ones they formed in. Which makes you think, how fricking huge was the universe where the black hole that spawned ours formed in? I get where you're going with this, but don't forget that stars form from the gases, then eventually burst, spreading the new matter and elements they've created into that new universe. Coupled with that, any life-bearing planets within the solar system in question could have also generated new matter via the energy of that star's heat. But most importantly, let's not forget that the universe we know is expanding, and that expansion is accelerating. Plenty of space for more black holes within ours. Given enough space-time, couldn't they eventually all connect to each other, essentially making black holes just gravity-centric stable wormholes that are currently unsurvivable per our current understanding? Maybe they are survivable and it's more like they feel like the metal going down Neo's throat in the Matrix, where the occupants just get all jumbled for a bit but reconditioned on the other side like a teleporter. Who knows? Nice. You have made it to the end already. Thank you for watching. If you aren't already subscribed, please do so, as there will be more videos like this in the near future.